see if all of the autorhythmic cells within the heart are kaput. They're not functioning. Contractile cells still are functioning, but all the autorhythmic cells are not. There's some issue either with the cells themselves or there's some issue with the conduction. But in the end, the autorhythmic cells are non-functioning. Contractile cells still are. What will your EKG look like?
Will you say it one more time?
Yes. What will the EKG look like if all the autorhythmic cells within the heart are non-functioning for some reason, doesn't matter why? Contractile cells still are functioning. And there is also no innervation or no activity with the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system is not influencing the heart in any way right now.
Can signal still travel through the
Conduction?
Yeah, like so. Can the signal in the AV node get to the ventricle?
I'll say it one more time. None of the autorhythmic cells are functioning properly. Contractile cells are functioning properly. And the autonomic nervous system is currently not influencing the heart.
Can we chat?
Drop. Drop. Don't talk. Drop. Drop. What do you think it'll be? Let your mouth not move. Let your finger holding the pencil move. And let your brain control that pencil.
It's a trick question.
It's not a trick question. Think through what you know of the heart. Autorhythmic cells are gone. Contractile cells are still working. No influence of the autonomic nervous system.
Talk to myself like normal.
Okay, so do you want to go first?
I don't care.
So
I mean,
It sounds like Mark wants to go first. He really wants to talk.
I don't think there'll be a P wave. Like because a P wave would mean that there's an autorhythmic somewhere that fires it off and it goes through the pathways.
But the muscles also have IF channels.
What if the
Right,
sniffer
but
in the atrial pathway took over?
but that's an autorhythmic cell.
Oh,
So
what's that?
so like he was talking about how it would spill over from cell to cell instead of the channel that spills.
Exactly. So you'd be a slower
So
conductor.
it'd be a slower conduction, so it'd be a wider QRS. And
Well, it's going to be like
There'd be no delay in the AV node.
there'd be no delay because the contractile cells of the
So it'd be a wave.
atrial.
It'd be a wave of conduction from the top of the AV, the top of the atrium, all the way through to the bottom of the ventricle.
it can't get
But
through
it
the
wouldn't
middle.
go through. It
Okay,
wouldn't
so
go through
but-
the
It'd be like a
septum,
third-degree
So
heart
then the-
block with.
well, my question is, are the contractile cells of the atria and the contractile cells of the ventricle on the same beats? Like contractile cells in the atria and ventricle, they aren't different. They're the same. They're just contractile cells.
But do
So
they have different IF
Do they
channels?
have the intrinsic value of that rate? The same rate. And if they had the intrinsic value of the same rate, they theoretically would fire at the same time.
Oh, yeah, the IF, the irritability, is that what you're talking
Yeah,
about?
of just a contractile cell.
Is it the same throughout?
Yeah, because I don't, there wouldn't be a difference between the contractile cell of the atria versus the contractile cell of the ventricle. So theoretically, they would fire.
Every cell would fire at the same
Every
time.
cell would fire.
What kind of cells are in the
Does not mean I'm right.
Those are.
Autorhythmic.
How does it even get there?
It
Well,
can.
I'm
So
saying
you
that
say
there's
the
a
atrium would
there's-
fire and the
there's
ventricle would fire.
a contractile cell in the atria and a contractile cell in the ventricle, and that hits its threshold, and then they start firing and passing off their signal cell to cell.
Okay.
So Mark is saying the IF channels in both ventricle contractile and atrial contractile cells are the same.
Firing at the same time.
I don't know if it'll be the same intrinsic rate.
Why would they be different intrinsic rates? Because
That's a good question. I just think it'd be a wide
what?
wide QRS.
Justin's gonna tell us what he thinks is gonna happen.
Why curious? I do agree with it being wide.
Listen up.
And that's all the ways.
What would it be? Peak.
So it could be way off, but I don't think you'll
I'll
see.
start by saying PY. This is exactly what's happening.
Okay, so you won't see P waves because the atria is not contracting. You'll see wide QRSs. And it will be slow.
Okay, provide more information. Expound on each of those points for a moment.
Okay, so you've lost connection from the SA node to the AV node. So the ventricles are still contracting on their own apart from the SA node. But at a slower rate.
Nope, no. You're doing good, keep going.
So yeah, you won't see it.
So pick one of those. Why is it going at a slower rate, in your opinion?
Because the autorhythmic cells aren't there, so the contractile cells are. So the AV node is slower than the SA node on its own.
Okay, no, keep going. You're doing great. I don't know if you're right or not, but you're doing great, so keep going. So why do you say the rate's gonna be slower?
Because without the autonomic nervous system creating the fast or slow beat, the AV node is controlled by the contractile cell.
Okay, go on. So you said it was gonna be a wide complex. Why is it gonna be a wide complex?
I don't know. I just know it is.
Why?
Because I've seen it.
Why? Why is it gonna be wide?
Because it's contracting slower.
Why?
Mark?
Mark's not gonna answer. Why? Andrew, why?
Well,
Do you agree with him, by the way? Or do you disagree with him?
so,
60.
I think it would be wider because it would be cell to cell. The depolarization would spread cell to cell rather than following along those Purkinje fibers, maybe?
Okay, you guys gotta get rid of the maybes, perhapses, I don't knows. Act like you know, go on.
Yeah. So, the intrinsic rate of the ventricles is between 30 and like 30 to 50, 30 to 40, something like that. I mean, I know it's that. And so, that's why it's going to be beating slower. And so the other things that you said too, there would be no P wave because we don't have any activity from the SA node to the AV node.
What was that thought? You just had a reconsideration
I
there.
did have a reconsideration because you don't actually see the depolarization of you don't see the activity from the SA node to the AV node
Okay.
on the EKG. So as long as the atria were contracting, you would still see a P wave. So if the contractile cells are good, and if the depolarization started in the ventricles, it could go up to the atria.
Could it? What were the parameters I gave you?
No, because the AV node is the only connection between the atria and the ventricles. And if the AV node doesn't work,
So what are you gonna have?
so you're only going to have a wide QRS complex because it originates in the ventricles and it's cell-to-cell depolarization.
And so are you reconsidering your reconsideration of the P wave, or are you?
Yeah, I'm reconsidering my reconsideration of the P wave because I don't think that the depolarization would go up to the atria.
Okay. No, you're not.
Yeah, Justin.
Okay. So I mean, I think he's mostly right, but I believe there would be a P wave because it's going to be similar to a third-degree heart block, where you're going to have a P wave that's disassociated from a QRS complex, and the P wave is probably going to be a little bit wider and longer than normal, as well as the QRS complex is going to be slower than the P wave.
Okay, so let's stop at the P wave for just a minute. You said wider and longer than normal? Wider.
I think it would be a little bit wider and longer because it's not traveling through the bundle branches.
Not bundle branches.
P
Sorry,
wave.
the pathways.
Autorhythmic
So how does the atria depolarize? How do the atrial contractile cells depolarize normally?
From top to bottom.
SA node.
Okay, give me more cellular information. How do they depolarize normally?
Cell to cell, so
Okay, and so how are they depolarizing now?
still
In our current situation?
still cell to cell.
So why is it gonna be longer?
Good point.
Okay.
No, not okay. Defend your answer.
I still think it would be longer because it's speeding up. When it goes through the pathways, it still speeds it up and then makes it so it takes place in a larger volume of cells because the signal travels faster through the pathways than it does through the muscle cells. So I still think it would speed up the signal to a certain extent, which is why I still think that it would be slightly slower.
Okay, so you think there's a P wave,
Yes,
and you think there's a QRS.
yes, but I
Do
think
you
they're
agree with Andrew and Justin on what they said about the QRS?
yeah, I think it would look
Do
similar
you agree
to.
with Andrew's assessment of why the QRS looks the way that Justin said it was gonna look?
Yes,
Okay, so give me more information about that, about the P waves and the QRSs.
because the whole point of the conduction system in the ventricles is to make so everything contracts at the same time. But if there's no autorhythmic cells for that signal to instantaneously travel through all of the ventricles, then whichever muscle cell depolarizes first, the contraction will just slowly spread from that point, which would,
Okay, so on an EKG, what am I looking at?
I think it would probably look like a really, really slow VTAC. So like, you know how in VTAC there's the long.
101?
No,
That's
so
a
I
slow
think
VTAC?
it would be all right. Sorry, not. But the way it looks in
Ventricular rhythm.
VTAC would look similar. The QRS complex would look similar, but it would be at a rate of like 30 or something.
Okay, I'm still not getting all the information because you're only talking about QRSs now, but you mentioned P waves.
So the P waves are gonna be on their own timing, probably at like 70 to maybe 90.
Why did you change it?
No maybes.
Why did
Tell
you
me
change
what it is.
Because you're still doing.
Tell me what it is and
contract
why.
cells.
No maybes.
I think the contractile cells in the atria have more IF channels than the contract cells in the ventricles, but that might be wrong.
I have to walk away
No,
from you.
stop with the, man, you guys, all of you guys, stop with that might be wrong. Tell me what you think.
I think that the contractile cells in the atria have more IF channels than the contractile cells in the ventricles because the autoarrhythmic cells in the atria also have more IF channels than the autoarrhythmic cells in the ventricles.
Okay, so what do you think will happen?
I think the P waves are going to be more frequent than the QRS complexes.
Okay, do we agree or disagree with what Noah has added to Andrew, which has added to Justin?
I disagree.
You disagree. What do you disagree with?
I think that a contractile cell in the atria and a contractile cell in the ventricle are the same contractile cells, just like an autoarrhythmic cell is an autoarrhythmic cell. So the intrinsic rate of an autoarrhythmic cell, or of a contractile cell, would be slow 20 to 40. And so our beat
Contractile cell from where?
from anywhere.
He's saying.
Because I was under the impression that a contractile cell is a contractile cell, whether it's in the atria or the ventricle.
Is an autoarrhythmic cell, whether it's in the atria or the ventricles?
Yes.
So why is there a difference in the autoarrhythmic cells?
Because they're
Dustin, what do you have to add?
Atrial contractile rate. I feel like if I'm not mistaken, that is there a rate?
Just go with it.
Is
You have something to say?
80 to 90. But there's also that's what the P waves will be firing at. But there's going to be no delay, if anything, between the atrium and the ventricle. So it's going to be slurred inside the wide ventricle. The ventricle is going to depolarize from the top, which would be a positive deflection to the camera, but it'll be wide and slower because it's not being conducted through the autoarrhythmic cells. So it's going to go straight down the septum as opposed to coming back up from the bottom.
Why is it polarizing from the top?
Because the intrinsic rate of the good question. Because the intrinsic rate of the top is maybe greater, is what I'm thinking.
The top of what?
The ventricles. So,
Where?
but it would be depending on where the signal starts from.
Where is it starting?
To me, it would start from the atrium and go down. So
How
the
is it getting from the atria to the ventricles?
that's the dilemma in my head, the questioning.
Anyone else have anything to add? Or want to disagree completely? I heard some votes for asystole somewhere out there.
I don't have that vote.
I don't think there's any correlation between the atria and the ventricles. I think they're two separate hearts firing at their own rate. I believe the atria is firing at a slightly faster rate than what the ventricles are. Not the intrinsic rate of 40 to 60. The ventricles are firing at a rate of 20 to 40.
Where's the signal?
They're-
So you're saying a third-degree heart block?
I'm saying a third-degree heart block because the autoarrhythmic cells going through the AV node are not working and there are no contractile cells there. So you have two separate hearts. Where does the beat actually start? I don't have a clear answer on that.
Why not? Why are you unclear on where it's starting?
Because I'm running the assumption that we can have a starting point anywhere in the atria or the
So-
ventricles.
So are you clear or unclear?
I'm unclear on that statement, but I believe I'm arguing that
Unclear
point.
on what you're unclear on. Annalise?
I'm stating the point of I think there could be multiple starting points in either the atria or the ventricles. I just don't know.
Alright, I'm gonna go out on a limb and say, I think you're gonna have a normal sinus appearing rhythm in that you will have a P wave, you will have a narrow QRS and followed by a T wave. And I think this because your contractile cells have intercalated discs, they're going to communicate with each other, and ion movement is still going to happen, and therefore it's going to drift towards those natural rhythms. I am done talking now.
You think you're done? Okay, so let's talk a little
I
bit.
thought I said with confidence you believe me.
I I noticed that everything's been.
He's gonna put holes all over.
Okay,
it.
so
Irregular.
why do we have a narrow complex QRS? Why do we have a narrow QRS complex? What makes it narrow?
Above the
The signal
AV.
The
goes.
Purkinje fibers.
Yes.
How so?
Because the Purkinje fibers allow, instead of the depolarization going from cell to cell, it's almost like a fast track that allows it to hit many areas at once.
And what kind of a cell is the Purkinje? Is the Purkinje cell?
It's an autorhythmic cell.
And so is it functioning right now?
No.
Okay, so it's not functioning. So how does the signal have to go?
Contractile cell.
It has to go cell to cell.
And the
What's that going to do to the QRS complex automatically?
widen it.
Because why?
Cell to cell.
Because it's firing.
What does that mean?
And
Why is it widening out?
It's firing, expanding. It's a.
It's taking longer.
So it takes more time,
Yeah.
okay? It takes more time. We're not getting the Purkinje fiber fingers attacking a number of cells at once. So Purkinje fibers are large autorhythmic cells that have connections to many contractile cells. Does that make sense?
Yes.
All of those contractile cells that the Purkinje fibers are connected to are also interconnected with each other through gap junctions. But this cell, this contractile cell, when it depolarizes, would send its ionic signal that direction to depolarize this one through those gap junctions. Yes?
Yes.
But we have a Purkinje cell that is attached to both of those. And when the Purkinje cell fires, it's sending its ionic signal to both of these cells basically simultaneously. Yes?
Yes.
Therefore, these two contractile cells will contract when?
Theoretically, the same time.
Basically at the same time, or close to it. Does that make sense? Okay, which means this cell is getting its signal to depolarize from
Our rhythmic cell.
the autorhythmic cell. Does that make sense?
Yes.
But we wiped this out. So now where would this cell be getting its signal from?
From the neighboring contractile cell.
From that, yeah. And if I had another cell here that's attached to this same Purkinje fiber, when would all three of these depolarize if the Purkinje system was working?
Either
In
You-
time.
Basically, if the Purkinje system
If the
is
Purkin-
working, when would all of these three?
at the same time.
Pretty much at the same time. But with this being wiped out, when will this one fire?
Those two get it first
After.
and then after those.
Okay, and so that inherently does what?
Slows it down.
It inherently takes more time. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Because it's inherently taking more time on an EKG, what's the x-axis?
Time.
Time. So therefore, it widens out the QRS.
And so since the bundle, his is broken and the bundle branch is broken, the signal is gonna go from the
No,
top down theoretically.
Where in the top, where's it coming from in the top? Okay, so
So
wait
that's
a
the,
minute.
that would be the next question.
No. Here you
Where
go.
does it come from? Oh, the top of the ventricle down theoretically.
Okay, here's my heart, right? Everything in black is non-functioning. Yes? Yes. So what do you mean by top down?
What I mean is, it's that you, in the normal pathway, the Purkinje fibers and the bundle of his and the bundle branch direct the signal to the bottom first, and then it fires up.
What's the
And
very
then
first
this-
thing, what's the very first thing in the heart to depolarize? Contractile wise, anyone know?
Atrium.
In the where?
In the ventricle, what's the
In the
first
ventricle.
contractile cells to depolarize? the
Right below the
ventricles?
AV node.
Yeah, the septum, is the first thing typically. That's the first thing that no one fires. I'm still interested in what you mean by top down though. I'm not
I guess-
seeing what
So
you mean.
I think he's saying the muscle cells around the septum are more unstable or have more IF channels than the muscle cells
Why would that be?
because the autorhythmic cells in that area are also have more IF channels.
I don't think you can determine.
More IF channels?
So-
What's the
More
difference in
unstable
That's-
IF
I-
Okay,
channels.
so why would those contractile cells have more unstable IF
The
channel?
same reason the
I-
autorhythmic cells have more
I-
unstable ones.
That's not what I'm saying.
What do you say?
I'm just saying that because the signal is not being directed to the bottom of the heart like normal, that potentially the signal would not start. I guess I assumed that the first contractile cells were at the bottom.
Why do you say it's being directed to the bottom?
Because isn't the ventricles fire from the bottom up, pushing the blood out?
What does the left ventricle look like?
Thick muscle.
One giant muscle.
What does the left ventricle look like? Go back to your anatomy.
A sac.
What does it look like?
That's a thick, in comparison, is that in
The-
comparison to the right
The
atrium?
ventricular muscle is a bag.
It's thicker,
Looks like a teardrop.
thicker than the
What do
right.
muscles do?
Contract.
Contract.
Give me different adjectives. What do muscles
Shorten
do?
or-
Shorten.
Shorten. That's what muscles do. They shorten. How does the ventricle contract? If I were to look at the ventricle and watch it contract, how does it contract?
Is it
It's
actually like
wider
a
at
twist?
Say that in words, B. Use words to describe that.
Wider.
I mean, twist.
It does what?
It twists.
Okay, so you're using all the right adjectives. What does that mean about how the muscle is anatomically laid out?
It's laid out top to bottom, so when it shortens like this, but at the same time it twists and rings.
How can it be laid out top to bottom
It's,
if you're telling me that it's ringing?
it's
Sideways
the- how it's the multiple layers of the muscle heart itself.
If it's
Isn't
top
it-
to bottom,
wait.
and all muscles can, what's the adjective that muscles can do?
Shorten.
Shorten.
If it's top to bottom, it should just do this.
But they're,
So
it's
spiral.
not like the north, south, east, and west of both parts, I know that's a different way of explaining it, are, it's not like north and north are pointing the same way, it's like one north and north. Does that kind of make sense?
No.
Doesn't it
No.
go, does it go medial last?
The top of the ventricle is wider, has more space than the bottom of the ventricle, and so there's more muscle in the bottom of the ventricle because it's shaped like a teardrop, like an
So does that
upside
mean it's
down.
just doing this?
So as
Or is
those
it doing this?
Isn't there 2 layers of muscle?
Do the muscle cells kind of spiral around, and so you get a?
Are you asking? You
I'm
telling me?
saying they spiral around,
Exactly.
and so you
Yeah.
get a.
Okay, what do you mean by spiral around?
They circumnavigate the ventricle.
On a
Are you
downward
telling me-
flow.
Are you telling me that they are
You have multiple layers of heart.
spiraling around like this?
Yes, towards the
Is
bottom.
that what it is?
Or are they
Yes.
just angled?
So if I have a spiraling heart like this, it starts here.
Kind of like a slinky.
If it starts where my thumb is, and it's going around like this, yes,
Yeah.
It's gonna go-
and it shortens, how's it gonna shorten?
It's gonna shorten down, or it's gonna.
If it spirals.
it's going to shorten from the bottom.
It's just gonna squeeze. But
It's gonna
B, what did you say it's doing?
It's twisted.
It's an
So
angle.
talk to me more about these spirals.
So you
The
have
mus- I
multiple
feel like
layers
the
of heart.
muscles are
Some
inward.
striations are going vertical, some striations are going at angles, and some striations are going around the outside. So when you have contraction of multiple layers of the heart, some are pulling it this way, some are pulling it at an angle, and some are squeezing it. So you get a kind of a wringing out effect of the heart by multiple different layers
We're
of
getting,
muscles.
we're getting
Not all contracted.
closer, I guess. We're getting kind of there. Right?
Cory,
And yes,
I'm
that's
having
my
a
name
real,
today.
I'm having a really hard time understanding why we're talking about the ringing out motion and why that's important to the.
Because a claim was made. A claim was made on the EKG that the point of initiation of the signal is going to be at the top of the heart. And that is an inherent misunderstanding of the anatomy of the heart.
But I owned it.
But we care about that because the origin of the contractile point is gonna indicate on your EKG what way your deflection is.
The point of it would be that we need to know why that was an erroneous thought process to begin with.
I don't know what the word erroneous means.
Error.
Error,
Oh,
only in the form of it was wrong.
erroneous.
And so what we are trying to determine is, what is this EKG gonna look like? Or can it look different in different situations? We don't know. But the claim was made that if the autorhythmic cells are disrupted, then there is a key point in the heart that is going to initiate a new signal. That's the ultimate claim that was made. And I'm trying to refute that claim. And my question to refute that claim was to ask you about the anatomy of the heart, for which we found out there's a gap in our understanding of the anatomy of the heart.
Absolutely.
Right? So, heart muscle, the heart muscle is in a somewhat of a figure 8. So instead of spiraling this way around the heart, it spirals around, then down and back, and then down and around, and then down and back, so that when the contraction happens, and the contraction, a muscle can only do what, right?
Shrink.
Shorten from point A
Sure.
to point B. Between those 2 points, it can only shorten, right? So if it's shortening, it will shorten and become tight like the pupils of your eyes, right? But they're attached to muscles that went the other direction, so when they shorten, they're gonna shorten the other direction, and we get a ringing action. But that's not all, because not only did it spiral around in a figure 8, but it looped under the heart as well. So not only do we get a spiraling action this way, but we get a spiraling and a squeezing action up. Does that make sense? It's like wringing out a sponge in your fist. You're wringing it and squeezing it at the same time, right? So those muscles are all throughout the heart that way. So I'm back to your original question. Why is it starting at the top?
I don't think.
If the auto,
Say that again,
I
Shane.
don't think we can
Yeah.
determine where it starts until we see.
Why not?
Because it can start anywhere.
Because it can start anywhere.
Yeah.
Why can it start anywhere?
Because they have waits for repolarization before they can get the next signal, and you never know where that signal's gonna come from.
So it just depends on which cell gets it first.
And the only way we can
That's true.
determine on where it starts is by looking at an EKG and see what the cameras are seeing.
Good, and there's not a whole lot of difference in those ventricular contractile cells from one to the next. They all roughly have the same instability of their IF channels. So therefore, because they have all the rough same instability of the IF channels, either all of them are going to start firing, in which case we'll end up with
A short
VFib.
QRS.
VFib, or one of them, or one collection of them, will get that signal just a little bit ahead of the others and fire off before the others have a chance to reach their own threshold
and create a rhythm.
and create a rhythm. Does that make sense? So in this situation, we are going to either wind up with VFib, or we're going to wind up with what I've asked you to draw.
VTAC.
Are the contractile cells between the atria and ventricle, are they different? Do they have different intrinsic rates?
The contractile properties of those two cells are the same. The IF channel instability of those two cells are not.
Yes.
The atrial cells are more unstable.
So
Those
is-
IF channels are
And-
more unstable.
So is there a communication between the atria and the ventricles then?
No.
Is there a communication between the atria and the
Okay, there is
ventricles?
not a communication between the atria and the ventricles.
So then
Because-
what?
So then you have two separate hearts.
You have two separate hearts.
I
But
was just thinking that
the-
the only
All
communication relationship that are between the atria and the ventricles, in terms of the septum, and is the autorhythmic cells.
Correct.
But since the contractile cells, they're all connected to each other, I mean, all of the heart muscles are connected to each other, that the atria could contract and then pass that down to the ventricles.
No, because
Yeah.
Somebody talk about that for a moment.
there's a separation, so
What's the
the,
separation?
the separation between the atria and ventricle, the membrane doesn't allow electrical impulse to pass. It only allows it to pass
Well,
through.
you're close, but terms are a little.
Right, my
What's-
Tums are-
What's between the atria and the ventricles? Okay, yes.
It's the AV node, but
Yes, what else is between, so what is between the atria and the ventricles?
Septum of some sort?
A septum, what's that
Septum.
septum made out of?
Connective
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 tissue?
tissue.
It does not
Connective
conduct.
tissue excitable?
No.
So there is not a continuation of heart muscle between the atria and the ventricles.
And that's through the entire, it's not like.
There's no connection with gap junctions of atrial contractile cells to ventricular.
So the
Okay,
only
I
route
figured
is-
that
So-
internally it was like that, but externally, but
Okay.
The septum is completely contiguous all the way through the heart that separates the atria from the ventricles.
So no signal pass, except through the AV, naturally.
so,
It's not the AV node either, but what is it? So the bundle of hits is the only,
Oh,
okay.
is the only autorhythmic, is the only conductible tissue between the atria and the ventricles.
and if that isn't working, then we don't have no conductivity.
So,
Anyways,
So your atria might be contracting, but the sheer volume is what's going to overwhelm that signal on your EKG.
yeah, that was my
Because
question.
you could have two separate hearts going, one's doing a thing.
And
one's
can you
doing
see that?
something,
No,
But you're not gonna see it because there's more mass
You would see some of them.
concentrated in the left
why
side
would
of
you
the
see some of
ventricles,
it?
which is
It's
gonna
just gonna
overpower
go
it,
faster.
similar to how.
When?
But
When
in
would it
VTAC,
overpower?
it's just,
All the time, always.
there's
All
no
the
slow
time,
VTAC.
always?
We weren't talking
So talk to me
said it would
about
look
how
like
the
VTAC.
atria
VTAC
depolarize.
or
Well,
VFib.
because. Wait,
Talk to me
why-
about how the
We're talking
atria
about-
depolarize. Talk to me about
Wait, you could maybe say
what
that.
difference or similarity
Talking-
there is in how
if
the
we have
atrial contractile
The
cells
ventricle,
depolarize.
this cell
compared to the
goes,
ventricular
then this cell
contractile
goes, then
cells
this cell
depolarize.
goes, then this cell goes.
Yeah, I get that, but I was,
The VFib is this cell
That's
goes
true.
and then spreads it.
Talk
and
to me
this cell
about
goes and spreads it. and
If
this-
I pull out, let's say that this is my cell in the ventricle that is starting my signal. I don't care where it came from. That's my ventricular pacemaking cell now, in this situation. And I have an atrial pacemaking cell somewhere up in the atria.
Mhm.
And I pulled that cell out and I pulled this cell out and just watched what they did.
Mhm.
What would be the same and what would be different about how they were depolarizing?
They'll both depolarize cell to cell, but the atria
It's
is
just
going
one
to
cell.
fire more frequently due to the instability of ion.
Okay, I want you to think of what you just said, which is absolutely accurate.
Oh,
I want you,
mark your calendars, people.
but I want you to apply that to what you said before, which was inaccurate.
Ah,
So what you told me was that the atria would be firing and the ventricles would be firing, but we wouldn't see anything in the atria because it'd all be covered by the ventricle stuff.
Right, by sheer volume.
But you refuted yourself. What you just said a moment ago that I said was accurate is correct and doesn't agree with what you said before.
Wait, those are not mutually exclusive things.
So I want to draw two separate rhythms here, right?
Okay,
I want to draw what you think is going to happen to the atria.
okay.
What is that? A whole bunch of squiggles or P waves?
No, it's gonna be
If there's
squiggles.
one pacemaker site, it would be F-way,
It's
right?
not-
It'd be regular. One site is making the
It's
signal,
depolarizing cell to cell,
Starting with one cell.
then it'd be regular. It'd be-
out from all directions.
Great.
It's not given direction. Holy God. It's
Great.
not gonna be given a direction. So
What do you mean it's not going to be given a direction?
Well, because that's your point of origin, so it's going to diffuse through your muscle, through all its intercalated discs.
Great. And there's not going to be a general direction that it's going to travel?
If it's,
No, because there's no cells that are gonna shove it one way or another, because there's no repolarization happening.
Here's my atria up here. Yes?
Yep,
That cell is right there.
there's gonna be a ton of cells going
What
directly
direction is that signal going to go?
out, but it's
Uh-huh.
gonna go down as well.
Oh, yeah.
And the down.
So does it have a
That's
direction?
because there's no,
We're
but
gonna see.
it could go up, it could go sideways.
Sure, I could choose this one.
Yeah,
And then what direction would it go?
out.
But the point is it does have a direction.
Yeah, but what if you put it in the
From,
middle?
in relation to,
Okay, I can put it in the middle. In which case, which direction is it going to go?
All directions.
Great, in which case it still has an overall direction.
AKA directionless.
So it could be that direction, it could be that direction, it could be that direction,
Right.
but it still has a direction, and then what happens to it? After it's spread its signal.
Does it
It's
again?
gonna have a refractory period.
Yes, and the refractory period on an EKG would look like what?
You wouldn't say it.
The reverse.
Atrial.
A refractory period
Not
would look like what?
Nothing underneath.
Exactly, it would look like nothing. And then what would happen?
Do it again.
It's gonna do it again.
And then it would do it again, so how's that a bunch of squiggles? That's pretty distinct.
But
How is that not just AFib though? If you're saying that,
Because we have one single place. AFib is not one single place. This signal is initiating from one place. What's the difference between my signal initiating here and my signal initiating here from the SA node? Still initiating from one place, right? If it's initiating from one place, then it's got one general overall direction that it's traveling, whatever direction that happens to be, right?
right, but with the absence of autorhythmic cells, what is gonna stop it from having multiple origins?
It could, but that wasn't our circumstance here. Our
Why was
circumstance.
that not our circumstance? That's what gave us VFib.
You're right, that would give us VFib if that was the circumstance.
That's what y'all just said.
So, so there could be watch, this could happen.
You're wanting him to draw, you're saying, and he's not gonna give you what you want.
Here's my heart. I've got a whole bunch of cells in here that are all trying to reach threshold. Yes?
Yeah.
Do we agree with that?
Yes.
Are we all in agreement on that?
Yes.
Okay. If this one reaches its threshold, at approximately the same time that one reaches its threshold, which happens to approximate this one reaching its threshold, which is almost at the same time that one reaches its threshold, which is very similar to when that one reaches its threshold, what do we get?
A fib.
We get fib. I don't care if this is
Right.
in the ventricles or the
Yeah,
atrium.
fibrillation.
We get fibrillation that happens because all of those cells are initiated almost at the same time, which means this cell is going to control that window of cells through its gap junctions. This one's going to control that one. This one's going to control that one. This one's going to control that one. This one's going to control that one, right?
Right.
None of which are coordinated enough to actually give a contraction, but all of which are having electrical activity. And we get chaotic electrical activity. Yes?
Yes.
All right. But what happens, I won't even erase that. What happens if this cell reaches its threshold and starts sending its signal, and for whatever reason, it happened to reach its threshold just enough ahead of time that none of these other cells reached its own threshold and instead went off of this signal, and this signal captured everything in the heart.
We would
Now what do we have?
a
Wave from
Y.
one location.
We have a wave from one location, and it got a hold of it. And what's controlling it?
This
Whatever it's
Itself.
in.
excitable, the least excitable things, yeah.
And so we might have the same set of circumstances that lead us to this or this, and that's just based on economics. That's statistics. That's how many cells got control over their short little area at a given time. But if one cell gets a hold of it before everything else can, then we have an ectopic pacemaker site, which is what I'm suggesting right now. Does that make sense?
An ectopic is anywhere outside of normal.
Ectopic means outside of normal. Think ectopic pregnancy.
That's what, yeah.
It means not in the normal place. Yep.
So I'd like to add a side note to what I was saying before.
Like to buy a ballot.
Okay, Mr. H, let's hear
I'm trying
it.
to be confident. So you'd have the YQRS, and then you may or may not have a P wave. You could have
Because
a
why?
Because if there was an ectopic pacemaker, you'd have a P wave because it's just the contractile cells that are showing up on the EKG. And if you didn't, you would still have the QRS because that's where a pacemaker is coming from, besides the autorhythmic cells, but it might not be happening in the atria.
So we may or may not have atrial activity, just depending on whether or not, it could be that the thing that was affecting those autorhythmic cells was affecting all of the atria. Maybe the atria is completely kaput. Maybe the atria isn't affected on the contractile cell process, and this is what we have. Maybe the atria is affected in something more like this, and the atria is just chaotic, and we've got the ventricles that are taking over their own system altogether. Any one of those things are a possibility. I wouldn't have counted you wrong have you drawn any of those, right? The commonality is that the ventricles are getting control of themselves. Yeah.
So those two specific figures on the board there, if you have an ectopic pacemaker, what we would probably see on the EKG would be a P wave, but it would be an elongated P wave because it takes longer to go from cell to cell versus being fired by the pathways, so it'd be a longer P wave.
Okay, so we need to fix that. We need to, because I've heard that twice now.
So in
Yep.
okay, so
No, we're gonna fix that before you go on. Okay. The autorhythmic cells in the atria are not Purkinje fibers. The autorhythmic cells in the atria are not Purkinje fibers. They are not connected to multiple atrial contractile cells. The atria contracts cell to cell, which is why we have a P wave already.